have to say, it is really good to see everybody this morning. With all the rain and everything, I mean, I was prepared. My introduction was going to be a joke about how few people there are here because of all the weather. And we got all these people here. Y'all came, a bunch of you. I knew you haven't been feeling well, and you're back here and attending again, and we've got lots of folk out, but it is so good to see everyone here. I have to confess that this is my favorite day of the week, mainly because I like the idea of getting together with family. I'm not sure how you were raised or how you were brought up, what strong ties you may have with your physical family. But frankly, what we're going to talk about this morning is family and how Jesus perceived family. And I hope that I can maybe open a door to you to show you how valid, how important, how wonderful it is to be a part of God's family. You and I are a part of God's family. In fact, if you look at Ephesians, the 3rd chapter, in the 15th verse, Paul is making a point with the Philippians, and it's based on the fact that he says, and he's saying as a prayer, I'm going to bow my knees to the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, in verse 15, for whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named. Now, I want to tell you something. God has priorities in the way He revealed Himself to us. And when you go back to Genesis, and you look in the very first part of Genesis, where He starts with humanity's creation along with everything else, but humanity was unique. The very first institution that God put into form was the beginning of the family in the marriage bond. In Genesis 2:24, man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. And then Jesus reiterates later on in Matthew 19, whatever God joins together, let not man put asunder. That's the beginnings of and the foundation of family. That institution is a divinely originated institution. It's something God set up. It's not a cultural anomaly in our current culture to play with and to define and change definitions like our culture has and just call anything a marriage. We know for a fact that's not the case because Herod was married to Herodias, so the law said, and John the Immerser lost his head because he flat told Herod, you got no lawful right to the woman you're calling your wife. And so it's important to God when you start talking about family. So when you look at this verse, we are a part of the family of God in heaven and in earth. Now I need to explain kind of what that means. That phrase, in heaven and earth, is a figurative term. It doesn't mean literally on earth, because if some astronaut goes up in a space module and he's circling the earth, he's not on the earth anymore, so he's immune. No, that's not what that means. In fact, when it says on heaven and in earth, or on earth and in heaven, it's not speaking heaven specifically, because death and Hades will go down together according to Revelation 20:14, and that doesn't happen until the second coming of Christ, when we all receive our new body and we go to heaven to be with God forever. And we know for a fact that God is the God of the living, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still living, and they're not in heaven. They're in Hades. And so when we use the phrase heaven and earth, we're not talking about the literal earth upon which we sit and the literal heaven to which we are going eternally. We're talking about all people in two different existences. The existence we have now and here, and the existence we're going to have there. It's kind of like saying, and you've seen the phrase, the living and the dead. That's kind of deceptive because, you know, the Sadducees thought when you're dead. It's over. There's nothing else to it. You're gone. All you got left for people on this planet is a memory, and that's it. But that's not what the Bible teaches. In Matthew 22, Jesus made it plain to the Sadducees that their idea of death was wrong. When you die, that's not the end of your existence. Because God's the God of the living, and He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who, by the way, when He said that, had long been dead, not living. So when we say living and dead, we're just talking about people in this existence and people in the other existence. But do you realize what that says in Ephesians 3:15? When it says we are children of God, we are part of a family in heaven and in earth. Do you realize that my big brothers and your big brothers, Abraham, Joshua, Noah, we are in the same crowd as that bunch that went before. Peter, John the Apostle, from whom we'll study this morning in chapter 7. We are a part of that family. Now that's pretty awesome in my way of thinking, because, I look around at us, and I know how families are. Families supposed to be a certain way, and I don't know how you were raised, but me and my 3 siblings, of course, when we were raised and we were trained up and we were, educated by Mom and Dad, who after they got rid of all 4 of us probably needed therapy. But anyway, after we were all raised and everything, you can look back and say, yes, all those siblings, my sister and my 2 brothers, we got along perfectly. We loved each other. We always spoke kindly because we're family, right? I don't know what your family was like. That doesn't define mine. In fact, I would submit my dad and mom raised us with discipline that was maybe what would classify as cruel and unusual punishment. One of the hardest things they ever did. Now, they were very free with the Lord. They put the Board of Education on the seat of learning on several occasions. But nevertheless, the worst thing they ever did is when, I'll give you one occasion. My sister and I were fighting. I can't remember what it was, but we were just bitterly fighting each other, said some ugly things to each other. Not that I'm sure any of you ever said anything ugly to your sibling. But we said something horrible, and Mom heard it. And when she did, we knew, because I knew this, because she said, Jeffrey David, and anytime she used my whole name, I was really in bad trouble. And she called us in there, and she sat us down, and Diane and I were thinking, we're going to get whooped big time here. And she was horrible. She said, y'all hug each other. I won't tell Mom, beat me. Do anything but make me hug my sister. That's horrible. But that's family. And I want to tell you something. When you get to heaven, and I hope you do, there is not going to be some corner you pout and curl up and go into some corner and avoid some of your brothers and sisters. We're family. We are together. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And it's not always that way. I understand that. The fact is, it's an interesting thing when you look at the Bible about certain individuals and what Jesus had to deal with. Jesus had kinfolk. Jesus. And by the way, I just have to throw this in. I know I'm chasing a rabbit a bit, but when you look at Matthew 13, and I'm just going from the Bible here, I'm not picking on anybody particularly, but there's a religious organization out there that says Mary was a perpetual virgin. In other words, once she had Jesus, that was all of it, and then she remained a virgin all her life because she was so special and holy, and people even prayed to her. And that's not what the Bible teaches. If you look at Matthew 13 and go all the way down toward the end of the chapter, verse 34, this was the common knowledge of everybody on the planet when Jesus was walking this earth. And they were wondering about why it is that this guy had such smarts, so much wisdom. How come his teaching was so understandable? And they make the comment, is this not the carpenter's son? Well, the answer to that is no. And that's the issue, of course. He is not the carpenter's son. He's Mary's son, but he is God's son. And so therefore it says here, is he not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? Yes, that's correct. And his brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, and his sisters. I don't know whether y'all ever thought about this or not, but Jesus had siblings. And Jesus was perfect, so I know he never did anything wrong to his siblings. But you got to ask the question, you reckon his siblings ever did anything wrong to him? Well, if you was listening along with Mr. Isaac when he just read this passage, yeah, they were a problem. We expect family to be, there. We expect family to be on our side. We expect family to be supportive. In fact, we're going to get to some of that later on as it applies to the church, as God's family. But it's not always the case that family sticks with us like they ought to. I don't know whether you've ever asked the question, but in my Bible study very often I go back through stuff and I wonder, why is it, and this is based on the idea that God does not reveal to us anything that is not entirely important and relevant to our lives. So here we have a family situation that John feels free to reveal to us about Jesus' family. Why? to you and I to know about this? Well, let's look at the event and then see how it applies, because it is very relevant. It would have not been revealed by God if it didn't teach us something. I want to see if we can't jerk some lessons out of this. Notice that in this particular context, this is towards the middle of his career. Jesus had been preaching and teaching, and there were a lot of people who knew Jesus and knew what he was, particularly in the leadership, and they didn't like him. And they were getting to a point where they were starting to try to figure out ways to off him, because they were tired of hearing him, and they were especially envious and tired of him dragging all the people. Every time he came into town, everybody wanted to go see Jesus, who he was, what was going on. There was little guys climbing trees just to see him. You know, that was the kind of stir Jesus caused. And all the religious leaders, being the pompous windbags that they were, really didn't like that. They were envious and jealous, and they didn't like losing that attention and losing the people, and they decided, well, the best way to do this is just get rid of the competition. And that's what they wanted to do. Jesus got to a point where he went on up north to Galilee, up by the Sea of Galilee, in a place where they weren't quite hunting him so much like they were down in the section of Judea where he had been teaching and preaching, where Jerusalem was in that area. Well, of course, he's at home now with his kinfolk, and you'd expect the kinfolk to be kind of supportive, and up comes this feast that's going to be had down there in Judah, in Jerusalem. And you would think he would get some support from his kinfolk. But listen how they speak to him. His brothers say to him, "Depart from here. Go into Judea, that your disciples may see the works that you are doing." Now I want you to know, because of this next verse, this verse is sarcasm. It's a dig. Now I know you've never done that to any of your siblings. And God forbid that you should do that to one of your brothers and sisters in Christ. You know, poke them just to see if you can't get a reaction. You know, we all have those buttons, and sometimes people just get a joy out of punching the button just to see if they can get a reaction. You know, I've seen that with myself and my wife, and I have learned over 45 years of marriage, don't punch the button. I can be taught. I'm a little slow, but I can be taught. But you know, that's what they're doing here. As a matter of fact, the next verse really explains it well. He says, nobody does stuff in secret. Well, he had not been doing that. That's why they were trying to kill him. And of course, at this time, they were still denying that they had malice and forethought trying to take Jesus out. And so it was not openly known so much he was being trying to kill. But everybody knew they were trying to kill him. He says, you know, while he himself seeks to be known openly, you don't hide yourself. You go down there and do everything. But notice the term that's used right after that. It says, if you do these things. They're talking about all the miracles that Jesus did along with his teaching. They didn't believe him. And they're taunting him. Go show yourself to the world. Now Jesus responds very kindly and explains to them, they hate me, not you guys. And my time's not yet come. That's why I'm not going there just at this moment. However, your time is always ready. There is, any time, and by the way, this is an open invitation that is always open to anyone who ever wants to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. That invitation, that time is open always for you. But then he goes on and says, the world hates me, it's not you. And you think about it just for a moment. I mean, this is Jesus' brothers and sisters. Can you imagine? Well, just think if one of your siblings was God. and all that went on, and all the hoopla, and all the publicity, and the fact that, which would drive me nuts if my sister was perfect and I wasn't. And you know how hard that would be to live with a sibling that never made a mistake? I mean, there are some factors here in this family that I can understand. Some of the angst here wasn't justified, and it really wasn't right for them to poke at him. But I want you to notice, too, that he says later in verse 8, I'm not going to go up to the feast yet. This is another chasing the rabbit, but Bosley mentioned it this morning in his Bible study. I appreciated the fact that we need to be very cautious and careful about the translations we use, because sometimes The translations, because of the text that they use to translate, sometimes translate things falsely, and they make things state something that is not true. Here's an example. You go up to the feast. This is Jesus talking. The man who is sinless, never sinned. You go up to the feast. I am not yet going up to this feast. Now, there are several translations that leave out the word yet. If you have one of those translations, let me just advise you kindly, you should throw it away and get you a good Bible, okay? Get you a Bible that doesn't make Jesus out to be a liar. Because if you don't have that little word in there yet, it says, you go up first, I am not going up to the feast, for the time has not yet fully come. And then later on, guess what Jesus actually did? He went to the feast, which kind of makes him out to be a liar. No, that yet belongs in there. It is proper so that the time frame is what is restrictive about his attendance at this feast of tabernacles. It's not a matter he was not going up there. Yes, he was, but not yet. And there's a big difference when Mama says, yeah, you can go to the park, but not yet. Or you can't go to the park yet. That's the other way to say it with a negative. If she says you can't go to the park yet, I'm still holding out hope that somehow or another, at some point in time, I get to go to the park. Jesus wasn't lying when he said, I'm not going yet, but I'll go later, and that's exactly what he did. Now, I can't imagine this being recorded because Jesus was overly proud of his family at this moment. And I can't speak for you as to how your family is and whether you have, well, I can only speak for me because I know my family. And I've got some that we, in a kinder sense of terms, we call black sheep of the family. Basically, though, they are just rebellious against God and intent on doing their own thing, no matter who they hurt, and they don't care. Now, I don't know whether you have family like that, physical family, but I do. And there's nothing that breaks my heart more than somebody I love dearly that I'm kin to. But I believe this is written here to show us how Jesus dealt with things. And I believe it gives body to Matthew 10:34. I want you to look at that briefly because when Jesus made the statement, and I've quoted this several times and made comments about it several times, but I think this gives some depth so that we understand where Jesus was coming from. As a matter of fact, there's another text I want to hit first. Let me see if I can find it right quick. It's in Matthew 12. Where did it go? I can't find it now. Let's go on to Matthew 10:34. It gives context. When you look at Matthew 10:34, what he said, when he tells people, I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. Now, that's understandable. We're soldiers of the cross. Jesus came to bring a sword. But what category of people are you going to use to illustrate the conflict that you're going to have in this life that's going to hinder you possibly or cause you disappointment when you decide, I'm going to belong to Christ, I'm going to be His? What category of people does He use? Your family. Now, He knows this firsthand because while He was on this earth, His family did not believe in Him. Mary did. Mary had some thoughts. In fact, a little deal at the temple when He was teaching, and she came and got him, kind of chewed him out for being not with the crowd, the family, as they left Jerusalem. He said, do you not know that I have to be about my Father's business? And folks, He wasn't talking carpentry. He knew who His father was at 12 years old, and Mary kind of put those things in her heart, the Bible says, because she was beginning to understand this boy knows who He is. And so Jesus knew family, and He knew these half-brothers, and He knew they didn't believe in Him, and He knew that's an embarrassment for Him. But He also knew, too, that when He came here, He came not to bring peace, but He came to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be those of his own household. Jesus lived that. And now you get to a point where you understand why I take the position strongly. I believe that the Bible teaches that our family that is really important is this family right here. I'm not dissing my physical family, okay? I got kin. I think a lot of it, most of them. But this is my family. Because this is the family I know are striving to serve God. And they're trying to get to heaven. And I realize that it may be an overwhelming concept for anybody to grasp that they're going to end up spending eternity with me. But I want to tell you, I want to spend eternity with you. It's going to be wonderful over there. All of the things that cause us grief, even in our relationships here, will not exist over there. Okay? For some reason or another, I don't know why it is, here on earth, we as a family function dysfunctionally. We don't do like we should. We have to encourage each other on occasion to do the right thing. Because what we ought to be doing naturally as a family, sometimes we just don't do well. But we should, because we're getting ready for heaven, where all the family will meet at the end of time. At the end of this existence for everyone, and then we will all be together for eternity. I can't speak for you, but I sure look forward to that. In fact, no matter some of you folks that are here that I know you've been sick, not feeling well, some of you came anyway, and I know you're not 100%, and bless your heart, I look at you and say, ooh, I don't want to get old. But that's the natural course of things, right? So I'm hoping the Lord comes today. Right after the dessert, I saw some of the desserts over there. I want him to come today because lunch is going to be great. But I want him to come soon because I want to be in a place with you where there's no pain and no tears and no crying like I know there is for some of you in your families right now. Jesus understood that. Now, I want to leave on a brighter note than this, okay? Because for all the grief that Jesus got from his kinfolk, it is interesting to me that most scholars will admit it without any pause, that when you look at the inspired books of the New Testament, do you know what one of the very first inspired books of the New Testament is? Jesus' brother, James. He's listed over in Matthew 13, just read it a while ago. And most believe that the Judas or Jude listed in that list, the last of those four boys listed, is Jude, the one who wrote the book of Jude. I know part of the reason this is in here about family, because you know what? As long as there's breath, there is hope. And as long as there is life, you have an influence on someone, whether it's your kinfolk or not, but particularly in this context, your kinfolk. You have an influence. And you may be the difference between them being in the family that lives together forever and those who are separated to a darkness we dare not discuss. Folks, we don't want anybody going there. We don't want any black sheep, dark sheep, lost in eternal darkness that just defies tormental description. We're family. There's no place in heaven for us to crawl up in the corner and fold our hands and scowl and not get along. What we're doing right now, folks, is preparing for heaven. And when Jesus tells us about his family was no less dysfunctional than ours. You think Jesus, the Son of God, have a perfect family. Not so. He had a family just like us. But he tells us in Matthew 10:34, you put God first, and you bring the family in. Don't leave God to go out there to them. I love my mom, and I hope she went to heaven. I don't know, and it's thankfully I'm not God, so I can't say. I think she lived faithful all her life, but frankly, I don't know. God knows, and I'm going to leave that to him. I'm not going to make judgments on that. But you know what I do know for a fact? I know Jeff. And I'm going to get him right. And I'm going to heaven. And I'm not going to hell for anybody. Because I'm going to be in that family that needs and sing praises forever over there in that next existence. And I want you to be there too. If you're not a member of the Lord's church, if you're not part of the family, be born into the family as John 3:3-5 talks about. And as we're told in Romans 6, 1 through 4, how you rise up to walk in newness of life from a watery grave of baptism, the likeness of Jesus dying and being resurrected from the dead. You can be a part of that family because God, in Acts 2:47, God will add you to His family. Be a part of that family if you're not. If you are a part, you've kind of shifted off and strayed off. Don't be a black sheep anymore. Come back here. We love you. We want you to be a part of this wonderful family that's going to heaven. If you need to make a change of any kind, we invite you in the song we sing. Won't you stand?